I have decided to terminate the planned summit in Singapore on June 12th. While many things can happen and a great opportunity lies ahead potentially, I believe that this is a tremendous setback for North Korea and indeed a setback for the world.
The White House calling this, quote, truly a sad moment in history. Here with me now to discuss Bruce Klingner, former CIA Deputy Division Chief for Korea and currently a research fellow with the Heritage Foundation. Bruce, your assessment of how this went down and the ramifications of it all.
It was certainly a surprise. Even just yesterday, Secretary of State Pompeo was testifying that the U.S. was still preparing for the summit on June 12th in Singapore, and our ally South Korea was surprised. They had an emergency midnight meeting of their National Security Council to figure out the ramifications. So a lot of it is in the messaging, but the president cited the most recent North Korean statement, one which insulted Vice President Pence and sort of threatened a nuclear showdown. But I think really it was a cumulative response to a series of fairly belligerent North Korean statements during the past 2 weeks.
What do you make with that, and how do we juxtapose that against some of the other overtures that we saw leading up to this, that it made everything so hopeful from the meeting between the presidents of North and South Korea at the DMZ? That went along very well, to the release of American hostages, to pledges of denuclearization. All of this seemed to be building up, perhaps false hope, but certainly a kind of anticipation that we were on the brink of history.
Right. Well, I think really North Korea shot itself in the foot. It had generated a lot of goodwill. Kim Jong-un was able to revise the public image of him. There was that exuberant, really over-exuberant perception in South Korea about the inter-Korean summit that the two leaders had. But I think when North Korea had these belligerent statements, it not only cast a shadow over the summit and really lost a lot of the goodwill that North Korea had generated for itself, but I think the biggest impact was one of the senior officials, Kim Dae-kwon, really publicly articulated what North Korea's position on denuclearization was, really rejecting the CVID, the Comprehensive Verifiable Irreversible Dismantlement, that the White House had been pushing. And I think the White House was surprised at how great a gap there was between the Washington and Pyongyang views of denuclearization.
Bruce, I want you to stay right there and bring in the rest of our panel right now. Patrice Lee Onwuka, she's Independent Women's Forum Senior Policy Analyst, along with Jim Hansen, Security Studies Group President, who previously served in the U.S. Army Special Forces. Patrice, let me start with you. The communique, I think it was from the Vice Chairman, or very high-ranking official, that Vice President Pence was ignorant and stupid. Again, this goes back to the whole Libya situation. They seem to bristle every time Libya has been brought up, whether it was by John Bolton a week or so ago or more recently by Vice President Pence. What's their issue here with the idea that we're either threatening them with the sort of situation that ended for Gaddafi, or why are they taking that so hard?
Maybe because they don't like to consider themselves akin to Libya. I think a lot of people would say, well, if you're a rogue nation who is trying to stockpile, dangerous weapons, and you're willing to sacrifice the security and the economic well-being of your people, then you're pretty much in the same boat. And I think they're really just trying to say we are not going to fall into the same trap that they did. I do think that the president was right to pull out of this meeting. The statement that she made was inflammatory, and the idea of meeting our nuclear weapons with theirs. I mean, I think that's a clear threat, and I think we don't want to deal with threats. We don't want to deal with villains who time and time again renege on their promises.
Jim, yesterday President Trump, really being very candid as usual, sort of shared his dismay at that second visit by Kim Jong-un to Beijing and the role that China was playing. Of course, he went there. She unveiled a new aircraft carrier, obviously a show of force and might. And you have to wonder to what degree the news today was also a shot across the bow to China as well.
There is no way we're going to get any kind of a deal worth having unless China helps. So I think you're absolutely right. This was a message to China saying, if you're not going to be helpful, we have a problem. I think another factor here was the North Koreans failed to follow through on some of the promises they made as far as allowing people to watch the dismantlement of their nuclear test site. They didn't allow verification of that. And they've been a little bit sketchy about showing up for meetings that they scheduled with some of our team. So they've been back backing away, and I'm not convinced there's not internal pressures that are making Kim Jong-un nervous that if he gives up his nukes, he may have an internal coup, or his people, the leadership, don't think it's a good idea. And we
so
need to
Jim,
convince
having
him.
said that, is this why President Trump continues to go out of his way to assure Kim Jong-un of his safety, of the prestige that he currently enjoys, and also to sell him on the idea that your entire country will be safe, and at some point you could even be rich because you have obviously a work ethic that's not being rewarded right now?
I think you're absolutely right. President Trump has tried to make him comfortable with the idea that this is not the end of his regime if he makes a deal that will support him. I think what needs to also be clear, and part of what brought them to the table in the first place, was that having nuclear weapons is seen by some in North Korea as guaranteeing the regime's safety. Actually, if they get and maintain nuclear weapons, that guarantees the demise of that regime, and they need to keep that in mind as well.
Patrice, the letter, right? The letter is obviously all the buzz because it really, again, it seems like classic President Trump, you know, speaking right from the heart and saying we had this wonderful dialogue we built up between you and me. Ultimately, it was only that dialogue that matters, and then leaving the door open. If you change your mind, having to do with this most important summit, please do not hesitate to write to me or call me. I mean, okay, it's like, what do you make of a letter? I mean, we know it was classic President Trump, but do you think it will resonate with Kim Jong-un and others who are involved in this process?
You know, I actually think it was more for an international audience to recognize that the president is willing to come to the negotiating table and that he's actually serious about this. I mean, he could have matched their vitriol with vitriol, and he actually didn't. And I think I give him some kudos for that. And so I think it's really to the broader community, international community, China, for example, saying, hey, listen, we still want to have some negotiations with North Korea if they are willing to actually come and sit down and be serious about it rather than playing games.
Right.
I mean, I think we've all been cautiously optimistic about this happening, and I think we can get back to that place again if they show some sort of force that they're willing to, you know, to actually to sit down at the table.
Right, Bruce, you've spent a lot of time, you know Korea better than anyone else, the peninsula. Now, you know, we're talking about nuclear weapons and nuclear arsenal and who can destroy who. Are you concerned about this rhetoric re-entering the conversation?
Well, we're certainly trying to figure out where next. I think the president, in his letter as well as the subsequent public statement, you know, he left the door open for diplomacy. Now, if North Korea doesn't come back through that door, then we're going to be watching for North Korea to resume missile and nuclear testing, whether, you know, additional rhetoric, threats, or even tactical attacks. And on the U.S. side, we're going to be wondering if there will be a resumption of the advocacy, including by some in the administration, for a preventive attack, you know, which could escalate to a broader conflict on the peninsula.
Thank you all very, very much. Next, we'll discuss the political fallout, no on NOCO, what it means around the world. Stay with us.